they have a nice kit that comes with 2 stones and a lapping plate and a couple of bottles of abrasive that can be used for flattening anything. You can flatten stones with that abrasive and their lapping plate. You can flatten the back of the chisel, the sole of your plane, and so on. One last thing that I would say about the planes is that depending on what you're doing, you may not always want a perfectly flat, straight plane iron. So for a jointer, one of these, or a 4-plane, where you're trying to create a flat surface on the edge of a board so that you can glue 2 boards together, you want a perfectly flat surface, so you want the plane iron to be perfectly straight across the bottom. But if you're trying to plane a board flat, or you're trying to remove imperfections or dirt on the wood, for instance, which is something we do a lot in timber frame, you might get a real greasy smudge on a timber, a plain timber, as we're putting it out. And the best way to remove that is to plane it out. We don't want a square edge plane iron, because we take the plane and we walk it down the beam to remove the grease, and now you have 2 hard striations at the edge of the plane iron. So for a jack plane or a smoothing plane, you might like to have a very slightly convex shaped plane iron, so that as you're planing, the edges of the plane iron just come very gradually and cleanly out of the wood, and you'll leave a slightly dished surface on the board, but it's so slight you generally don't notice it. Now, when I say so slight, you want it very slight with a smoothing plane, on the order of 1/1000th of an inch, maybe to 5/1000ths of an inch, 0.001 to 0.005. But with a jack plane, where you're trying to remove a lot of material, you might want to have a 1/16th to an 1/8 of an inch of difference from the edge of the plane iron to the center. When you take the plane iron and then pivot it up, like this slightly, you're reducing the convexity, it's not really a word, but you know what I'm saying, of the plane iron. Right? You understand that geometry changes a little bit. Anyway, there are a number of different ways to create that. One is to just take, after you have your plane iron sharp, if you're a real cowboy, take it out of the honing guide and just sort of freehand the 2 edges. But you want to be careful not to hit the part of the plane iron that's really going to be doing the cutting. Veritas makes a special jig for plane irons. We call it their camber roller assembly. So the wheel, rather than being straight across like their other honing guides, has a very slight camber to it. I think it's about 5/1000ths of an inch from the center to the edge, and from the center to the other edge. So it gives you a very, very slight edge. The other thing you can do is take a piece of wood and create the shape on it that you want, the amount of convexness that you want on a piece of wood, either using hand plane or rasp, and then attach a plane iron to that. And the wood will rock, and it will create the convex shape on the plane iron that you want. It makes a huge difference. I mean, you probably all experienced this, where you take your beautifully sharp plane and you plane something, and within each individual pass, the wood looks beautiful, but then you have these lines that connect them all, and that doesn't look very good. Just creating an ever so slightly convex shape eliminates that, and it will actually create a beautifully flat surface over a broad expanse.
You want a regular arc of a circle?
Yes. Yep. For the most part. On some of my planes, like this smoothing plane, I actually just do the very corners. Just round them out ever so slightly so I don't have a sharp edge. So I can, it's still noticeable if you're looking carefully for it. And if I were to take the plane and just go right down the middle of the piece, is like a barrel, like an old whiskey barrel. And so you would. Exactly. But it's really slight. So you're almost not even aware that you're doing it, but you have to work on making sure that you're tipping it back and forth. It creates. One other thing that I point out about planing, hand planing, is we get all of our timbers. I mentioned that my interest in planing is largely related to timber framing. Planed at the mill, so they arrived here, looking quite smooth. But if you come up and look at this, you know, the planer that they use is not a hand plane. They're not taking a continuous shaving from one end to the other. There are 3 or 4 knives set into the cutter head that's whipping around. Each one of those knives comes down and takes a chunk out. And so you can see and feel that pattern. And that is not a great glue joint. If you're trying to join things together with just glue, then what you get from a jointer, a craftsman jointer, for instance, or what you get from the mill, really isn't that good. And the beauty of the hand plane is that it allows you to take, I mean, it is the most precise tool in your toolbox. It does absolutely precision work when it's tuned well. It can take off shavings that you can see through, that thin. And so it's an amazingly accurate tool that is, when it's sharp and true and so on, it's a joy to use.
I think I've destroyed the iron in this plane by trying to sharpen it by eyeball, and I'm wondering whether I can rehabilitate it or whether it needs to be replaced.
I would be surprised if it's destroyed. You have to take off a lot of steel, you know, to truly.
How much length do you have to work with? How much length can you eventually, in the life of your iron, sharpen away?
It does depend on how many catastrophic events your plain iron has to tolerate. So, you know, how many times it gets dropped into concrete floors.
Well, that's why I said length rather than sharpening.
Right. I mean, it does vary, but it can be, on the smaller planes, obviously, it's pretty small. And it also depends on whether you have, this one has 3 different attachment points, so as it gets shorter and shorter, you can just keep moving you can move from this slot to this slot to that slot over its life. But not all plane irons have 3 different attachment points. So, you know, it could be as little as a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch, or it could be, you know, 1 inch to 1 1/4 of space.
So that's still a few catastrophes.
Yeah, this one's got plenty of life left in it. Yep. You know, again, what I like to do if I want to create that convex shape is first I'll get it dead sharp on a flat surface, and then I'll address the rocking issue.
I was not trying to get a convex shape, and that was before. I do have one of those Veritas thingamajigs, and that works really well. And so I guess I just have to sharpen the P out of it with that and get it absolutely straight across.
Yes, straight and square. Now, especially on a plane like this where there's no lateral adjuster, you want it to be nice and square to the sides of the plane up, because you don't have much ability to pivot it.
Do you ever want to pivot the iron in a plane?
No, I don't think so. There are times when you might want to skew the iron to the wood, but you can do that just by skewing the whole plane. And that does 2 things. That changes the effective angle of the plane iron. When you skew it off to the side, it basically lowers. So it would make a bench plane act a little bit more like a block plane. The other thing that it does is instead of taking 2-inch swath of wood when you skew it, you're effectively only taking 1.5 inches. You know, some amount less because you're on an angle. So it actually makes it physically easier to slide it through the wood, which generally gives you better results. If you can have a nice smooth shave all the way through, you're going to end up with better shaving than if you're stopping and stuttering. So.
Did you want to talk about the structure?
I do want to talk about spoke shaves. What can I tell you about them? I mean, do you have a specific question, or just in general, how do you treat these? Well, the one that you have, obviously, is flat, and so all of the things that I was discussing relating to the plane would, to some extent, apply here. You'd like this, depending on what you're doing. Generally, you want this to be, if it's intended for flat work, you want this to be nice and flat. You'd like the back side of the spoke shave iron to be flat. But again, the most important thing is that your cutting edge is nice